Hi everyone. So I believe we are now going live. We are slowly having everyone attending. Hi everyone. The virtual doors are open and I assume you are all filtering through and hearing my voice at whichever sentence is starting to come through your speakers. I'm Mark McBride-Wright and I am chairing the session today. We've got a great lineup, and today we're going to be looking at future-proofing the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, and supporting female engineers. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce the panel first. If we can move to the next slide. So we'll start off with introduction, a keynote speech from Terry Spall, who is the current president of the institution. And then we've got a brilliant panel lineup where we have Sophie Harker, who is a senior engineer flight controls at BAE Systems. We've got Sue Baguley, head of business development at Siemens Digital Industries. John Allport, professor of automotive engineering and director at the Turbocharger Research Institute at the University of Huddersfield. And Dr. Enas Abu-Hamed, co-founder and director of H2Go Power Limited. So, and there are all our lovely faces, but of course you're going to see us on video in a moment. And I run my business, Equal Engineers, and we are working with IMechE right now on supporting their diversity strategy. So before we launch into the questions, and I wanted to just give some background into what to expect from today. So we do have an element of interactivity. So shortly we'll be going live with a poll question to find out a bit about your understanding on diversity and inclusion. But we also want this to be interactive. So there is the ability to submit questions to us through the chat function. So if you hover over and find that in your work pod, then if you click on that, submit a question, then we will see it, and I'll try and keep an eye on it and build the questions into the flow to make sure they're answered as we go through. So before we launch into the hearing from Terry, we're gonna, Jenny, if you can please bring up our first poll question. So the poll, I'm being told, has been launched. So we'd like you to just give us an answer to this question. Are you aware of the benefits of a diverse and inclusive culture? So we're doing this just to get a sense check on where people are on the journey to diversity and inclusion. Are you an enlightened professional? Is this your first time hearing about this topic and you want to find out some more information? Are you someone who's heard about it in the workplace but you don't know much about it, so you want to come here for information and find out? So if you can, you have to exit the full screen mode in order to see the poll. So if you exit from full screen, then the poll should be there for you. So if that poll is now, I think we've now had it open for a little while, so I'll give it, I need my Carol Vorderman countdown timer on. Right, okay, the results are in, I'm told. So the results, so let us see the results. So I'm waiting to see what's from my side. Okay, well, I'm still waiting to see what they are. Okay, I have them here. Okay, so 66.4% of you are aware of the benefits, 31% somewhat, and 2% no. Okay, great. So there's some learnings there that we can build in and maybe we can hear from yourselves on some of the benefits that you experience as well. Okay, Terry, I'm going to hand over to you now to give us our introduction. Terry.
Okay, well, thank you for the introduction, Mark. A very good afternoon to you all. As you heard, my name is Terry Spall. I am actually the 135th president, following in the footsteps of 131 male presidents and just 3 female presidents. And that sort of speaks for itself. So that, along with the fact that we had to wait until 1997 to see our first female president, you could look at such stats and say, well, at least we're getting better. But I look at them and I think, well, my goodness, we need to do much, much better, not just in terms of female engineers, but also in all aspects of diversity and inclusion. So I think we all know that engineering has historically been a very male-dominated occupation. These days, although 51% of the workforce is actually female, only just 12% of engineers are female. Though that is increasing very slowly, what I find as one of the most disturbing trends is that having qualified as engineers, far fewer women actually remain in engineering than their male counterparts. In the institution, I could impress you all and say that we have seen a 37% increase in female members over recent years, but that would be quite disingenuous. And what I should be saying is that we actually do even worse in that only 9.6% of our 120,000 members are female currently. There has been a positive trend over the last 6 years, because the figure was actually 7% in 2014. So it is creeping up, but wow, not nowhere near quick enough. So we can be very clever with statistics and make it look very good, make it sound better than it is. The reality is it's just not good enough, and we need to do better. Interestingly, our student member fraternity are doing much better in that we've got 14.5% of our student members are female. But when you look at their progression through the institution to senior levels of membership, associate member, and then on to fellow, by the time you get to fellow, it's been quite a slippery slope, and we're down at 3% female, which is not great at all, to be honest. As president, I chair the trustee board, and we do slightly better there. And this year's board is 16% female, which means 2 of the 12 trustees are female. More would be great. It's one of those things when we look at the trustee board, it's not many people, but we would like to see a good demographic mix in there. And whilst we do well in some aspects of diversity, we don't do well in others, and certainly room for improvement. So just expanding on student membership, those who know me will be aware that I've been involved with Formula Students since it started 21 years ago. And this has been a hugely rewarding and enjoyable experience for me. It shows the IMechE at its very best. It's seen more than 42,000 students transform into some of the most employable engineers who've then gone on to amazing careers with the employers that they've gone on to serve. And if I look back at what was my very favourite moment from all those years in Formula Students, it was in 2018 when I was presenting the Spirit of Formula Student Award to the very first all-female team, which actually came from Pakistan, would you believe, the National University of Science and Technology. And it was quite an emotional experience, actually, to be on stage presenting this award to them. And to say the team were demonstrably emotionally compromised would be an understatement when they received a standing ovation from an audience of around 2,500 students. It was quite something to watch, to be honest, and I'll never forget that. It's quite an experience for them and for me, but a little sad in that, it was such an exceptional occurrence when in reality it should be the norm, to have equal numbers of female teams and competitors. So where's it all going wrong? I'm sure we all know well, as I do, that some of the problem lies in part in the school years. And by the time students get to their A-levels, twice as many boys would consider a career in engineering as girls. So we've already partly lost the battle by the age of 18. There are many organisations that campaign to influence the situation to produce a better outcome, and they're to be praised for their efforts and the differences they're making. but progress is still frustratingly slow. So what are the challenges? Well, we've had the following. We've certainly considered it, and the following are really what we think are the main contributing factors. And I'd be interested to hear if they actually resonate with you as well. So I think a lack of female engineering role models might be one reason. We think it might be poor public perception of engineering as a career, and that's perhaps truer here in the UK than it is in many other countries. Gender stereotyping, and work environments that are perhaps not that inclusive for women. So there are lots of reasons. The issues are wide-ranging and complex. So it's not easy to know which diversity initiatives will have the most impact on improving the situation. And this is where we should focus our research and effort. But we are determined to make a difference and hear more from you today about the challenges from your perspectives and the possible solutions. The institution's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, which is chaired by one of our female past presidents, Isabel Pollock, and I think Isabel is actually on the webcast today, is working with our exec, the trustees and myself as part of this year's business plan to develop a diversity and inclusion strategy as part of our longer term goal to enhance activities for staff and members globally, with the aim of bringing about hopefully positive change and greater effectiveness. We are at the start of our journey. We've got a way to go. Some great work's been done, but as you might expect, really it is complex, but the motivation's there and we need to do a lot more. So the chair of today's webinar, Dr. Mark McBride Wright from Equal Engineers, has been appointed by the institution to work with our D&I committee to help develop and deliver the institution strategy over the next few months. And we hope to cultivate a vision and a sense of belonging for all stakeholders of the institution, ensuring everyone with the requisite skills and experience can feel the engineering profession is open to them. The initiative was launched earlier this month, and it covers communicating and discussing issues around diversity and inclusion with members and staff of the institution, the wider community through focus groups. And I have actually I've participated in one of these groups and found the experience to be extremely enlightening. I previously naively thought I had a good understanding about D&I, but the focus group really pointed out to me that actually I didn't, and that really is a positive thing for me. It also covers developing a report outlining the D&I strategy for the short and long-term goals, covering IMechE employers, members and volunteers globally, and an action plan with clearly marked priorities and appropriate next steps. And finally, the definition of a diversity KPI or KPIs linked to the IMechE's operating plan and informing the development of a new institution strategy. So coming back to today's webinar, this is the first in a series of events and webinars being organised by the institution focused on diversity and inclusion in the engineering workplace. Each will focus on a range of different underrepresented groups, and we'll also look at various cultural barriers in different settings, from large corporates to small and medium-sized enterprises, and how these can be removed and just what the institution can do to support it. The idea for the event came from a group of our members in the Yorkshire region. They have had some experiences with the institution where it was not exactly clear what our stance on D&I was, and sadly they had some, shall we say, not so positive experiences. So I think fortunately and importantly, they wanted to get involved, share their experiences and help the institution to develop. So it's no surprise to find that this first webinar is a Yorkshire-led initiative focusing on women in the engineering workplace, how the profession, and for that matter the institution, can support and improve diversity in the industry, focusing on women in engineering. So we've got a very high caliber panel. I know you'll not disappoint us in putting them to the test with some incredibly challenging questions. So I hope you enjoy the webinar, and thank you all for your participation. Over to you, Mark.
Lovely, thanks Terry. Okay, we've already got some brilliant questions starting to come in. So I'm going to go between what we've got planned, but also answer from the ones that are coming in. I just want to start with the obvious one to our panel. Have you ever had any personal barriers that you've had to overcome, and what general barriers do you think there are for women in engineering? So, Sophie, maybe if we can start with yourself.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I'll mute myself. Before I start, I'll just give a caveat. My hay fever is terrible today, so if I suddenly disappear, it's because I need to sneeze. So sorry. But yeah, so I mean, in terms of personal barriers, I think my main one, at least growing up, was that I didn't know what engineering was. I was actually 19 when I found out. I met Dr. Helen Sharman, who was the first Briton in space. So she was the first person to ever say, "Oh, have you thought about engineering?" Because I don't come from an engineering background. I don't come from an area of the world really that engineering is sort of involved in terms of there's not any big sites nearby, no big companies. So I just never got exposed to it. And the only time I got exposed to it was when someone came around to fix the washing machine and called themselves an engineer, and that was it. So it took a long time for me to get exposed to it. That was my biggest barrier, and I think that is a big barrier for a lot of young girls. And trying to get them into engineering is they're not always exposed to it all. I think that's probably the biggest one. Whereas I think once you're in it, it's a very different set of problems. For me personally, it's more about almost building a subconscious trust of people, so that people will actually not believe what you're telling them, but will buy into your opinions and thoughts, and even your analysis. There's a lot of second guessing. I think it's probably my biggest barrier there.
Okay, and I'm just thinking, we've got like good representation on the panel from large employer, SMEs, and also academia. So in the sort of startup world, you know, running your own enterprise, I believe you recently got a fellowship as well at the Royal Academy of Engineering for your startup. Congratulations on that. Have you ever perceived there to be any barriers?
So hello everyone first. I'd like to answer this question in a bit of a positive spin. I must say that I had more springboards than barriers so far. I'm not an engineer myself, but I run an engineering startup. I started it 5.5 years ago. It's an energy storage startup, and the barriers, in my opinion, are around perception. But at the same time, if you continue to work with people and to look around, I feel that this is the best time probably to be a woman in engineering, because everyone wants more and you get more attention and more support. And I would say that this is more of my experience. Basically, I found more springboards than barriers. With the perception barrier, this is something that we've got quite a bit of work to do on, and this is one of the barriers that I did face as well. But at the same time, it isn't a very high barrier. It's something that we could work on and improve.
Thank you. Sue, what about yourself? What are Siemens doing in this area, and what about you personally?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think, you know, when I think about my own sort of barriers, I don't feel as though I've ever, come across any significant sort of barriers in terms of, you know, both myself and my career development and within Siemens. I think, you know, when I reflect on the question, I do see there are elements of your own kind of personal barrier. So, you know, for me throughout my career, and I'm very pleased to say that, you know, that it is shifting as time moves on. But actually, certainly when I started in sort of doing senior leadership positions within Siemens, quite often I would walk into a room full of people and I didn't recognize myself in any of the people that were in the room. And you hear and read quite a lot about, you know, an imposter syndrome. And actually, when you don't see people like yourself in a room, you do feel that sense of being, an imposter, and you feel you have more to prove. And, you know, I've worked quite hard on my own self-confidence, my own self-belief, and, you know, to overcome that personal barrier in terms of, being a different person, in the room.
And then, thank you for that, Sue. And John, how are you supporting the up and coming talent then at University of Huddersfield, getting people prepared for the future?
I think the thing to emphasise is that certainly on the gender position, there's no differentiation. My particular research group, I've got over 25% female, which is fairly exceptional. The usual barrier for me is actually finding women engineers to bring into the position. So I'm fully in agreement with Ines there. I had the same issue when I was in industry. Trying to find female engineers to recruit is the biggest difficulty. It's that pipeline right through from schools to get more girls studying engineering and technical subjects at schools that I've found is the biggest difficulty.
So on that point then, I'm going to group together some questions that are coming in around recruitment, methods for recruitment, and then also to your point, John, around pipeline. So we've had some questions come in around gender neutral language, do we implicate bias within job descriptions? Is that affecting who we recruit? And then in generally, what more can the institution do? And it's not just a UK problem or a Europe problem, it's the whole world, young women studying engineering. Are there ways we could more transformationally inspire people to consider engineering as a career, young girls as a career?
Can I just step in on that one, Mark? In that it's not necessarily a worldwide issue. In my former role as being in charge of recruitment and training for India and the Far East, it's far less of an issue there than it seems to be in Europe and particularly in the UK. I think we're just particularly bad at it in the UK.
Okay, so how do we improve then? Sue, I think you're on mute. You look like you're talking, but we can't hear you.
Oh, I am. Yes, I'm double muted. Yeah, it's a really good question that you ask, and I think if I share with you maybe some of the practices we put in place some years ago, actually at Siemens, because we recognised in our apprenticeship recruitment that we weren't getting enough females applying for our apprenticeship scheme. So we took the opportunity to look at the language of our adverts and women in science and engineering about maybe some of the language that was perhaps our sort of environment we were trying to create and perhaps a little too exclusive. So we actually rewrote all of our adverts, and whether by luck or design, that year we actually had a 50-50 application for our apprenticeship schemes, and that was then also mirrored through the recruitment process, whereby in that particular cohort, and that has continued, that we are beginning to see much more of a gender balance in our young early career professional programs, which is really good to see. But it maybe took somebody from outside of our organisation to feed that into us, to make us believe and do something a little bit differently.
Sophie, thank you for that, Sue. Sophie, as part of the so you won the IET Young Women Engineer of the Year award in 2019, is that right? It was last year? 2018. You're on mute as well, by the way. So as part of that, so 2018, sorry, I'm losing my time here. Part of winning that, you had to go out and give some speeches and talks. So what was your finger on the pulse of the country at the time? Was part of your outreach?
Yeah, it was a strange year that year, because you went from speaking to some very senior people in a very formal setting to going into a school and talking to literally 5- and 6-year-olds in the same day. It was a very strange year, but I think the positive I took from speaking to the more senior community, as it were, is that they want the more diverse side of things. It's never, in my experience, been greeted with, no, we don't want more women, like outright. That's never come out. The problem I've always had is then the comments that have been raised is, how do we recruit them? And if you haven't got a pool of females to recruit from, how are you ever going to get there? And when you go and speak to young people, when you go to speak to like 12 and below, they're all very much on an equal playing field in terms of interest in those subjects, from what I've understood. Like when I talk about the work that I've been on, talk about rockets and space and all those things that I talk about with them, it doesn't matter whether they're male, female, they're all excited. As I get older, as they get older, and I start speaking to more 15, 16, 17-year-olds, I found the girls are almost embarrassed to be interested in it. It's a really weird phenomenon where they don't want to almost appear intelligent. Like they want to fit in with all their peers, and they don't want to be liking something that isn't stereotypically a very girly thing to do. And I think that's our big barrier, is sort of encouraging young girls to say, actually, it's a very cool thing to do for all of these reasons. There are people just like you that do it, and we are all well-rounded people. We're not like, either in our overalls with oil, or the polar opposite as crazy scientists. There's this spectrum of people in there, and they can fit in, and that it's not a thing to be embarrassed by, to find something that you're really interested in and to pursue it. It's a strange phenomenon I've noticed.
We've had some questions coming in around grouping together SMEs, like working in, if there's just one or two of you in your business and you're both male, and then linked to that just being a man in general in engineering. How can you support advocacy and support, bring down barriers, or be a springboard even for female talent in engineering?
Can I jump in there? I've got a ready-made up for that one. My big one is speak up and challenge it. When you see someone doing something that is intentionally limiting, is to say something. And this is a very hot topic recently with the whole with Black Lives Matter and the low number of BAME engineers in engineering as well. Like that's a very big topic as well. And the similar thing happens when you see sexism, when you see racism, all those things. Is say something. That's all I personally, it's a very personal thing we really care about, is say something when you see it happening, because when it happens to you, there's not much you can really do without being labelled as someone who's being accused of things. So it's quite a hard thing to do, but I really, really encourage it.
That's the element of active bystander training coming in there, isn't it? And knowing when to call something out when you see something happening. We've had some other questions come in around progression. So we're doing a lot of work to get young girls, women into engineering. I keep saying young there as if there's an age bias. There's a big movement of work to get returners back to the profession as well, which we need to do more on. But the people who we have, how do we ensure suitable progression? Is there a penalty if someone goes on maternity leave, for example?
Yeah. Can I maybe give a couple of examples, Mark, to
Yes,
some of the things that we do? So firstly, I think, in terms of career development and in particular leadership development, so we have run very specific women in leadership development programs for a number of, or a very wide audience of not just people who are perhaps one step in terms of their career ladder into leadership, but actually looking at it very much as a future talent and a future leaders program. And that's been very, very helpful, I think, in helping our female engineers or female potential leaders within Siemens to really understand, how to, sort of progress from a leadership perspective. And when we look back and look at the success of schemes like that, we have about 65% of the female employees who've been through that program have gone on to take more significant roles within the organisation, either as leadership roles and managing teams or managing teams of teams, or sort of as a lateral career development, which is around expanding their scope. And I think in particular, taking leadership on very specific strategic projects from a company point of view. I think having a returners programme and having a very specific returners programme for employees is also really important. And that doesn't need to be a massive scheme, but it just needs to have a programme around it. And the final thing we've been doing and trialling and piloting quite recently, which is a very inclusive approach, so not just about gender, but looking at employee-led flexibility. And I think, if the environment we're all trying to work in at this moment in time tells us anything, it tells us that organisations can work extremely flexibly. So, coming back to the point of springboards, I think, let's use the situation we're all in now as a springboard to look at how to develop and deploy flexible working policies that therefore allow people to be, in different work-life balance situations, and for that not to impact them and their career development.
Thanks for that, Sue. We've got some questions coming in that allude to the fact that, we're not just one person or one single identity. We are more than just one aspect. So intersectionality, we've had some questions come in around ethnicity and, do we track, can we collect data on that? Do we have data on the percentage of BAME women coming into the engineering field? So just curious around data and collection. And the experiences of intersectional identities in your workplace. What are you doing? What is your organisation doing on data collection? And do you collect data on ethnicity? John, you're on mute. I can see you talking.
Sorry. Click the wrong button. It's very much something we do at the university, and it's something that's taken into account right across the educational sector. In fact, the latest results on employability have just come out yesterday. I've just been looking at them this morning, and that breaks down into gender, ethnicity, social background. So we do collect data to that level of granularity to look at these things and how we can influence the less well-performing members of the cohorts or how we can affect their performance to bring them up to be as good as anybody else.
Thank you. One way to push change can be through supply chain and collaboration with supply chain partners. So, Enas, just keen to hear on how you, as you're in a unique position as a woman of colour. You're startup of a business that I think is going to go somewhere, given what you're focusing on and what the future of energy is. So, just keen to hear your experiences around, do you collaborate with your partners on diversity and inclusion and springboards for others?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So that's a really good question to ask. What I can say is that with your question, you're pointing out to a problem or something that we actually don't focus on. In my company, I am the only woman. And when we put an ad to recruit for a job, some jobs we get 0 women applicants. As a startup where you have so many challenges to solve, it's very difficult for us to find a solution for that. As well, when you're focused on, say, looking at a deal, you're under pressure and the inclusion problem isn't really like on the top of your list. And as much as we want to do something about it and change that, it isn't possible for one small entity to provide solutions. This has to be a solution that comes from like a bigger institution or like a bigger consortium of partners. unfortunately, I cannot say that, you know, we are able to do much on inclusion and diversity when we are talking to partners about partnering on a specific project, like how many women or how many women of color we could bring into that. It isn't part of the conversation.
I think it's certainly from a public sector point of view. The reason, for example, John has to track data like that is because they're a public sector organisation and they've got a duty under the Equality Act to close any gaps in inequality where they see it, and that's where data then plays its part in data collection. So in large infrastructure projects, for example, with High Speed 2, it does form part of, you know, bidding on that. And so it can be seen as a way to, can you still hear me? Hopefully. Yeah, so maybe if we move to the, okay, great, you can hear me, great. I'm going to move on now, sorry, to the international dimension of IMechE. So how can we work to focus in on the UK, but also helps ensure that we create a diverse profession globally?
I can go if you want. But for me, this comes very much from a virtual side of things. One of the positive things around the COVID-19 crisis is that we are uptaking in virtual events like this one, which means we can connect more globally. So I'm not actually a member of the IMechE. I'll put my hands up. I'm an IET and Royal Hour member. And we do a lot of work now with our American and Asian and Eurasian and all sorts of different areas that we normally wouldn't have had as much interaction with. So that uptake in the virtual world I think is really, really important. And my charity that I'm currently in the process of setting up is all about using the video technology that we obviously now using every day during this crisis, but it's using that to reach directly into schools. And I think that will make a huge difference. And obviously when we've got people from all across the world talking about all different projects, and when you're Skyping someone who's, you know, working right in the weeds of something really, really cool, like it's very hard to not celebrate that, if that makes sense. So I do think that virtual working helps make it more global. Something we've been very from experiences with the other two societies and institutions, they've been very hesitant to make it too virtual. I think this has shown that we can do it, and we can get a lot out of going virtual, and we can almost foster a more inclusive environment globally because of it.
Okay. Any other comments on the panel on the international dimension?
I'd certainly agree that I think people are far more accepting now of this virtual environment. For example, I've been talking to people in Vietnam this morning. I've got a call with Nepal after I come off here. It's just making life so much easier to communicate, and people are accepting that. And hopefully it will continue after this current crisis, and we can continue to develop a much wider network and keep that communication going over those distances, and not let the distance be a barrier to actual collaboration and working together.
So bringing it back to the UK then, within Birdcage Walk, within the home of IMechE, there are portraits and artwork in the HQ which showcase the rich history of the institution's past. But how do we ensure that the institution is inclusive and reflective of the modern values of the institution? Are you frozen? Oh, Sarah, Sue, you're on mute again.
Oh, am I muted?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm back now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question to be asking, you know, at this moment in time around sort of, you know, portraits and artwork and celebrations, not necessarily of the person, but of what they achieved. You know, I think, you know, innovation and invention and things that are current, you know, are equally as valid, I think, in terms of display and artwork as is the history. So, you know, for me, I think, you know, the showcasing of what is happening and, you know, evolving in the world of innovation today, you know, is equally as important in terms of, you know, making that available for people to see. So that would be, you know, kind of my view of, you know, around that. And in that, you know, you then naturally get, you know, the diversity of ideas, diversity of thought, and where that's coming from in terms of the people who are contributing to that.
John, you look like you're going to say something.
Point, Mark. Yeah, on about the artwork and showcasing things, and it might be something we can put to Terry, that for example, with the Equal Engineers competition and the primary engineers competitions, things like that, where we're getting all sorts of artwork and suggestions and bright ideas from young upcoming potential engineers of the future, maybe we ought to display some more of that, and let's take this forward rather than just looking backwards. Let's look forwards and showcase some of the future engineers.
You're on mute, Terry. You're still on mute. No, still on mute. I can't hear you. No. Well, we'll come back to you, Terry. But I think there's some. Oh, hang on. Maybe it's my speakers.
No, we're not hearing Terry either, Mark.
Oh, you're not,
No, we're not hearing Terry either. I think he was making a commitment to do that.
He was, yeah. Well, thumbs up, but yeah. The question really had been motivated from some of the focus groups that we had been running, where it was around, which is linked to really the theme of INWED, the International Women in Engineering Day, and the role that you know, mechanical engineers have in play in the 21st century. So I'll just move on to that question then. So the theme of INWED this year is Shape the Future. So what is a mechanical engineer in the 21st century, and how are mechanical engineers shaping the future?
Can I jump in?
Yes.
And try and answer this question? So I think we live at a different time where we really need to think about the future, because the type of challenges that we're facing as of today and we will face in the future will be very different from what the past looked like. For example, take a problem like climate change. This is a problem that we didn't think about 50 years ago, right? We focused and cared about other things. The fact that we have problems like that means that if we want to shape the future for the better, we really need to focus on what are the biggest challenges that are coming into the future, and how do we design solutions for them, starting from the present today. And solution is directly linked to engineering, any type of engineering. And that's where there's a lot of input for engineers in all shapes and types, women, BAME, young, all of them are needed, because all of them are going to share the future.
Great answer.
I think if I could just build on that answer, actually, I think, you know, some of the projects or some of the more recent projects that, you know, I get to work on, you know, some customer challenges, they require all aspects of engineering to be involved in, you know, really quite agile teams. So, you know, I need a data scientist, I need a computer scientist, because invariably aspects of what we're doing are digital. I also need people who come from perhaps even the creative and arts type background, because actually you need different ways of visualizing things. But then actually I also need, you know, the mechanical engineers, where actually the problem solving and the approach to problem solving, you know, is very complementary to the way that perhaps somebody that's coming from a data science background would try and work. So, you know, for me, an appreciation of both mechanical engineering and, you know, a computer science, or coming from a computer science type background, or even an electrical engineering background, you know, that blend of having the diversity of skills in a team is going to become really, really important, you know, in the future. And the one thing I love about all my colleagues who come from a mechanical engineering background is they have this amazing ability to break down problems into small parts. And actually, when you blend that with somebody who's got perhaps a data science type background, that combination of somebody who can break down problems into small pieces to work on and then build them back up again, are really, really complementary skill sets. And it's lovely to see in teams. And I see more and more of that happening in the workplace, you know, as we become much more digital as organisations.
Thank you, Sue. Terry, I believe you're now connected. Do you want to come back in then on the question around representation at the institution and what you were saying when we couldn't hear you?
Okay, so can you hear me now, Mark?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, fantastic! Right. Sorry about that. I did what everybody gets told to do: switch it off and switch it back on again, and it also miraculously works. So there we go. So I absolutely resonate with the questions about what you see when you walk around our institution. It is very retrospective in its landscape. So we see lots of portraits of people who've done great things in the past, predominantly male. We see lots of old technology, lots of steam engines, and my personal view is what's the kind of interesting. You know, we should be doing much better than that and looking forwards, not backwards. You know, and I've already put my feelings down on this, that we want to try and make some changes within my presidential year. So when people walk in the building, what they see is the shop window of really exciting things. So, you know, a whole bunch of steam engines are not necessarily going to connect with a female audience necessarily. But when you look at some of the other smart technology that we have, the things that are happening that are really interesting and driving industry and what have you today. You know, I get involved with lots of startup companies looking at very, very innovative technology. And when I look at the demographics of that group of people, it's far more balanced. You know, there's a huge number of females working on that area, and it's really exciting. But we're not quite getting that in how we portray it. So we can do something, and I'll certainly be trying this year to try and make sure that we visibly the building changes. And when you walk in, it's a bit more gender friendly, shall we say?
On the, we keep using, you know, the aspect of gender, and it's important to, you know, recognize that it's not a binary concept. So given we're talking about, what about the experience of transgender women in the institution or in an industry? I run a network for LGBT plus engineers, so I'm not on the panel though to talk about this. I'm keen to hear your views on supporting the experiences of people from those backgrounds.
Yeah, it's a good point to make, Mark. And to be honest, I'll be absolutely honest, we don't do it well enough. You know, we really don't do it well enough. And you know, as I mentioned in my opening comments, a lot of work's being done now on D&I, recognising this and trying to make it more inclusive. We're very fortunate in that we're trying to do it at a time when we've just been through a governance review process. So we've got the opportunity to make changes to our code of conduct and even our cultural behaviours. So we've got people now working on these things. So it's a great time to bring these things forward, because we can bring these things in and make sure that we, from a D&I perspective, that the new things that we're laying down for the future are appropriate. You know, we've got that chance to do it now. So we're not in a bad place, but we need to make it happen. So the work we're doing with you, Mark, hopefully that will help us along in that direction.
I hope so too. We're getting so many questions. I can't count the number. There's probably about 30 odd here. I've been trying to weave them in and group them in and listen to yourselves provide brilliant answers. Again, we've got 10 minutes remaining. What we did want to do now was to we wanted to just ask the audience, in light of what we've been discussing in this webinar, what's the one thing you're taking away, or more actually, what is it that you might like us to focus in on in the future? So I believe we can capture this in the chat, or you could probably submit it as a question. We will receive the questions after this chat. So if you can tell us, we're writing the diversity strategy right now. What is it you would like us to consider, to action, to see for the institution? Now I can't, because we were not asking this as a poll, so I guess we'll see the results come in the audience chat. No. Okay. I'm going to assume there is lots of brilliant contributions coming in somewhere, and we'll get them following the session. So we've got some closing remarks from Terry in due course, but I just wanted to go back to the panel. Maybe if there's one final point we could end with, like one key action that can help support the attraction, retention, and progression of women in the workplace. What's the one thing the listeners could do that can have impact? So, Sophie, I'll come to you.
Mine kind of ties in with that last question you asked about what the future mechanical engineer looks like. And I'm not a mechanical engineer. I'm actually a mathematician, but moved into aerospace. And the biggest thing that I think to help going forward is to challenge, is to not necessarily to take on a challenge, but to be a challenger. And I don't necessarily mean to always call out sexism and racism, all those things when you see them, which is obviously things we should be doing. But I actually mean challenging the status quo. So when you're sitting on a panel and it's all male, go, okay, well, I'm going to give up my seat until you replace it with someone who's from the female community, someone from the BAME community, blah, blah. So there's all those things that you can actively challenge. Or when you're looking at a project and these things are essentially going to be repeating the past, but with a new bit of kit on it or new bit of tech, like what's the point? That we need to challenge those things. And I think by challenging the status quo is when you're going to start to see real change in your, not only in your company or your workplace within academia, but within the wider status of things, as we start to be seen more as a vocal profession, as it were.
Thank you. So challenge the status quo. Sue, what's your point?
I think for me, it's about becoming an ally. And when I say that, I think that's around, be an ally for somebody who is different than yourself. And what that means is you then, learn about their mindset and their frame of reference. And actually quite often when in that process of needing to call out or feedback to people when something's not working, quite often having an ally that helps you to do that is a really powerful thing.
Lovely. Thank you, Sue. John?
I think one thing that we can definitely do is to try and get away from the gendered stereotype that we sort of pushing to children right from primary school, in that you get all the the toys, for example, are very gender stereotyped. Even to what we do within the institution, the majority of the challenges that we've got tend to be transport based. Maybe we could look at something that has got more of a general appeal. A lot of my work is in sustainability and development of technology for developing countries. That has far more appeal to the female engineer students than it does than would potentially a formula student. So it's maybe looking at emphasising different aspects of what engineering is all about to sort of broaden the appeal of it.
Okay, thank you for that, John. My connection went a bit bad there, but I think I caught what you were saying around challenging stereotypes. Finally, Enas.
I would say do things differently. If we want different results, we would have to solve problems in a different way. And in your organization, institution, no matter how big or small it is, just try and do your part in a way that you think could contribute and bring in progress and advancement.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And I guess if you want a bit from me, it's to get people to understand their own diversity story, understand when they've been through adversity, to build empathy then for the needs of underrepresented groups, because every single person on this planet has been through some sort of difficulty in time, and underrepresented groups in engineering face that more frequently than the majority. So the majority need to get introspective and understand from their own frame of reference when they felt excluded. And that's how we start building up cognitive diversity as well as supporting our focus on demographic diversity. So we've got loads of great suggestions coming in now as well in terms of support for going forward. In the final 4 minutes then, I'm going to hand over to Terry for some closing remarks. Terry.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Hopefully you can still hear me. Yes, good.
Yes.
So I've been following the questions all the way through. Some absolutely fantastic questions and some brilliant responses from the panelists. So thank you all for that. It is really timely for us in the institution to have this now. I mentioned before the chair of our D&I group is Isabel Pollock-Huff. And Isabel's listening to this. I know she'll be very keen to get all of the questions afterwards, and we can start to actually do something useful with it. I've tried to pick out a few that I thought were quite interesting. One of which is, we, in trying to attract more females into engineering, it's great to have good role models, and we're always on the lookout for female engineers who've done some really great things in their career, who'd be good role models for the younger people. So if you do come across people like that, I mean, we're always looking, but clearly we can't see everything. So do be quick to identify those. In terms of engagement in what we do in the institution, we're completely changing the way in which we appoint people onto the different boards and committees. So it's much more driven by skills and experience, and not just who knows who, which often we're criticised for, because you end up, if you're not careful, with a very biased population of people in the driving seat. So we want to make sure that we have great diversity of people on the bus. We also need to communicate better, and I saw the question about the website and making D&I much more prominent on the website, and I'll make sure that Isabel is aware of that as we go forward. I also saw the questions on workplace flexibility and the fact that often the female members of the household get lumbered with a lot of the domestic tasks, and that means that unless they can work flexibly, it means sometimes they can't work at all. So COVID might be the silver lining for the cloud, really. That means that we can continue this practice of people working from home and give them the flexibility. I think it works great. I mean, yeah, you do miss your colleagues in the workplace and the banter and everything else, but my goodness, you can do an awful lot from home, and sometimes you can do even more than what you could do with the distractions of the workplace. So that might help as well. We looked at somebody mentioned about why the student percentage is good or better than, let's say, the fellow percentage of female engineers, and what we can do about it. And clearly, a lot of female engineers, they either drop off the career ladder for a whole variety of reasons. Some might want to engage or re-engage, and there are perhaps things we can do to help them in terms of their qualifications and how they're recognised and how they can maintain their connection with the institution whilst they're out of their career for whatever reason it might be. So there are things there, I think, that we can also look to as well. So that's all from me. I must admit, I've really enjoyed listening to this today. Every time I get closer to DNI, I feel a little bit more enlightened. So hopefully, whilst I'm in my year, I can do my bit to help all of you to really to do it much better than what we currently do. So thank you for allowing me to participate today. Over to you, Mark.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Terry. So I just want to say thank you to all our panelists for brilliant contributions and for giving up your time in both the planning and preparation, and also for putting on and coming up and giving answers today. Thank you to Terry as well for that. And I also want to say thank you to Christina from the D&I committee. She does a lot behind the scenes to enable everything to happen. Thank you to everyone who's joined us as well. Some brilliant suggestions that are here. We will receive an output of these questions and points. And yeah, so just wanted to let you know that when this survey, I believe a short survey will come up. So if you want to complete that, just to give us some feedback on how it's gone, another chance to input and maybe some topics you want us to consider for the future, if you'd maybe like to be a speaker, for example. And yeah, have a great weekend. Thank you for your time. Thanks, everyone. Bye.